Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 775, and today is March 26th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a decent amount of news to get through today. It hasn't been overbearing like the past two episodes of the show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted over at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's out anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, follow me on Twitter at KyleAnslone_ for all my work. Additionally, if you're in the Massachusetts, New England area and you want to come see me speak this weekend, I will be speaking at the Massachusetts Libertarian Party Convention on principled opposition to Trump's foreign policy. I think I have a pretty good one scripted out and ready to go. All right, with that, jumping into the news today, and we're starting off with an article that I wrote yesterday for the Libertarian Institute. U.S. brokers Russia-Ukraine Black Sea truce. So after holding separate talks with Russian and Ukrainian delegations, the U.S. announced that both sides had agreed to allow commercial shipping through the Black Sea, mirroring a similar agreement established earlier in the war. According to a Russian statement on the deal, Washington, Kiev, and Moscow agreed to the restoration of the 2022 Black Sea Grain Initiative. So the statement said, in accordance with the agreement between the presidents of Russia and the United States, both sides have committed to implementing the Black Sea Initiative. This initiative includes guaranteeing safe navigation in the Black Sea, refraining from use of force, and prohibiting the use of commercial vessels for military purposes, while establishing appropriate control measures through inspections of such vessels. The 2022 truce was meant to allow Ukraine to export grain and Russia to ship fertilizer through the Black Sea. The Kremlin withdrew from the pact in 2023, explaining Western sanctions were preventing Russia from exporting its products. Additionally, the Kremlin complained that the agreement was supposed to see the grain go to Africa and the nations that were not only really dependent on Ukrainian grain, but also just dependent on, external food imports anyways. And what Russia argued was that most of the grain ended up going to Western countries where it wasn't as in need. So I'm not sure if that has anything to do with this time around, if there's any restrictions on where the grain is supposed to go. Russia does seem to have gotten an agreement from Washington that Washington would help Moscow's export to reach buyers, which I guess means they're either not going to enforce sanctions or they're going to, specifically tell some companies, you will not be in violation of our sanctions if you do this, essentially giving them a letter stating that they have permission to conduct this trade. So the agreement was made after American officials spoke separately with Russian and Ukrainian officials. While the renewed truce marks a major step towards President Donald Trump's goal to end the war in Ukraine, President Zelensky said if Russia breaks the deal, he expects the White House to ramp up arms shipments to Kiev. He told reporters, if Russia violates this, then I have direct questions for President Trump. If they violate, here is evidence. We ask for sanctions, we ask for weapons, etc. Zelensky made a similar remark earlier this month regarding a 30-day ceasefire that was proposed by the U.S. and Ukraine and presented to Russia. Those negotiations led Kiev and Moscow agreeing to halt attacks on energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian defense minister said Tuesday's deal includes the implementation of the ceasefire on energy infrastructure as well as in the Black Sea. Russia confirmed that both sides had presented each other with a list of energy targets that cannot be hit, and the Ukrainian defense minister went on to say that the Ukrainian military would attack Russia if its Black Sea forces operate outside of the ceasefire zone. And so he said the Ukrainian side emphasized that all movements by Russia of its military vessels outside of the eastern part of the Black Sea will constitute violations of the spirit of the this agreement will be regarded as violations of the commitment to ensure safe navigation of the Black Sea and threat to the national security of Ukraine. In this case, Ukraine will have full right to exercise its right to self-defense. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also expressed doubts about the viability of the agreement, saying Moscow would need well-defined guarantees from Washington. Oh, and those can only be the result of an order from Washington. He added that the Kremlin does not trust Zelensky to keep his word. And so I think if we're looking at this from an optimistic standpoint, this is definitely a step in the right direction. If we are hoping to see an end to this war under the Trump administration, this deal may be key in establishing some trust between Moscow and Kiev that would be necessary to make that agreement, but also start to slightly, just slightly, turn down the temperature of this conflict when it's been escalating for years. For the first time in quite some time, this is the first set of de-escalation. And even if it's minor, even if it's not something where you could actually point to and say, oh, well, any attempts on energy infrastructure are going to see an end to this war. That's not obvious. And so it's possible that this deal lasts for 30 days and then both sides, or one side or the other, abandons it. And we just go back to the full fighting as before. However, we haven't had something like this again since the grain initiative in 2022. And since then, there have been so many escalations in this conflict, so many people have died, that I do really think there is a window here that this could be built upon and actually come to a full agreement that ends the war. Now, again, that is still optimistic, that still is off in the future, but that is now a better possibility. Now, the one I think downside is both sides are seeming to say like, well, we have some issues with this agreement and it may or may not last, which, if that's the mindset going in, I do have some concern that this agreement just falls apart. And then maybe Moscow and or Kiev, I definitely think we would see from Kiev the narrative, and then of course that means the narrative presented to the American people, because our mainstream media just so eagerly laps up whatever the Ukrainians want them to tell us. And that message would be as, oh, see, you cannot trust the Russians. The Russians will break any deal you make with them. And so the only solution here is war until we drive Russia completely out of Ukraine, which is a recipe for this war going on until the Ukrainian military collapses, and then the Ukrainians have no leverage whatsoever at the negotiating table at the end. All right, this is a very interesting article. U.S. intelligence says Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Dave DeCamp, March 25th, antiwar.com. U.S. intelligence agencies have reaffirmed that there is no evidence Iran is developing nuclear weapons, or that Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has reversed his 2003 fatwa that banned the production of weapons of mass destruction. So the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, told a Senate Intelligence Committee the intelligence community continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and the Supreme Leader has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. Gabbard's comments were based on the annual threat assessment, which is released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which input from all U.S. intelligence agencies. The report did note that there had been more calls inside Iran to reverse the ban on nuclear weapons, which have grown in response to Israel's aggression in the region. So, the report reads, in the past year, there has been an erosion of a decades-long taboo on discussing nuclear weapons in public that has emboldened nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. The Ayatollah remains the final decision-maker over Iran's nuclear program, to include any decision to develop nuclear weapons. The threat assessment comes amid increasing U.S. tensions and threats of military action over Iran's nuclear program. Iranian officials have rejected the idea of talks with the U.S. in the face of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign, but has said that the door is open to indirect negotiations. The hype over Iran's nuclear program revolves around the enrichment of some uranium to 60%, the highest level Iran has achieved, but still lower than the 90% needed for weapons grade. Iran first took the step to enrich at 60% in response to a 2021 Israeli sabotage attack against the Natanz nuclear facility, which was meant to sabotage talks between the Biden administration and Tehran, which was successful. So Iran is still a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and has told the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that it won't enrich uranium beyond the 60% level. Amid increasing U.S. and Israeli threats about its nuclear program, Iran recently pointed out that Israel has a secret nuclear weapons stockpile and that its program is not subject to IAEA inspections since Israel is not a signatory to the NPT. So this is, a really important thing that to discuss and that gets mentioned occasionally just because there is so much hype in the U.S. around we have to stop Iran from getting nukes, we have to stop Iran from getting nukes, that the American people essentially believe that if a deal isn't done, that if we don't do something, Tehran is going to have a nuclear weapon, and that they're just a few weeks from doing so, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And all this hysteria about Iran getting nuclear weapons, all these threats towards Tehran are the one thing that could lead Tehran to making nuclear weapons. All right, next up here, UAE commits to $1.4 trillion investment in U.S. economy. This one from Will Porter on March 23rd. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, has pledged around $1.4 trillion in investments in U.S. businesses over the next 10 years, according to the White House. The spending will send new money into AI infrastructure, semiconductors, energy, and American manufacturing. Announced on Friday, soon after the Emirati National Security Advisor Sheikh Tahun bin Zayed visited Washington to meet with high-level U.S. officials. The massive project will substantially increase the UAE's existing investments in the United States, the White House explained. The spending includes $25 billion deal between the UAE investment firm ADQ and its U.S. partner Energy Capital Partners, which will put the money into energy and data infrastructure. Another UAE state-owned energy firm, XRG, also said it would invest in U.S. natural gas production and exports and announced additional plans to make substantial investments in U.S. assets across gas, chemical, energy infrastructure, and low-carbon solutions. So the White House said in its statement, these significant investments underscore the close ties between the U.S. and the UAE. Some of the deals that make up the $1.4 trillion project were not disclosed by the Donald Trump administration. Earlier this year, Emirati businessman Hassan Salwani vowed to invest $20 billion into the U.S. economy over a very short period of time, saying he would build new data centers across the Midwest and Sunbelt, including Arizona, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. Trump said the latest talks with Abu Dhabi underscore the efforts to advance economic and technological futures between our two countries. Sheikh bin Zayed praised President Donald Trump's leadership and economic policies, noting their significant role in stimulating foreign direct investment and fostering robust economic partnerships. And there may be some benefits on the tax end or something like that that's happening here too, but my guess is that the UAE is doing this right now when Trump is in office because they see this as their way of maintaining their place in the American empire. During Trump's first administration, administration, especially when it came to the Middle Eastern countries, he often lauded that, their buying of American weapons, contracting with American weapons dealers was greatly benefiting the American economy. While that isn't true, and most of the money goes to the top, just like a lot of this money, I'm sure, will go to the top, the salaries of CEOs and executives, people well tied in Washington, will be the main beneficiaries of the UAE's investment here. Nonetheless, Trump is at least going to tout it as a major economic victory for himself and for the country, and the result of his America First policies. Again, even if that's not true, what it is going to do is secure the UAE's place in the American empire. All right, next up here, U.S. ultimatum to Lebanon, negotiate or wheel back further Israeli escalation. This one from Jason Ditz from early last week. U.S. Deputy Envoy to the Middle East, Morgan Artengis, has delivered an ultimatum to the Lebanese government, demanding that they form committees to participate in direct negotiations with Israel by the end of the month, or face escalation of the U.S.-backed Israeli attacks on Lebanese territory. Negotiations were announced little over a week ago, and Lebanon said no direct talks were happening. Israel has expressed hope that these talks would ultimately give way to normalization of Israeli-Lebanese relations. The U.S. wants direct Lebanese participation and wants 3 committees specifically on the issues of active Israeli occupation of 5 military outposts inside Lebanon, the border itself, and the potential Israeli release of Lebanese prisoners. Since Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has promised Israel will continue to occupy those outposts, irrespective of how the negotiations go, Lebanon has seen little interest in participating. Israel released a handful of prisoners when the U.S. first announced the talks as a sign of goodwill. The U.S. administration clearly wants to present these talks as a big diplomatic win in the region, but the threat of Israel giving Israel permission to escalate attacks against Lebanon probably doesn't mean much, since the U.S. has already given Israel a free hand to attack Lebanon throughout the ceasefire, which began in late November, and Israel has carried out hundreds of attacks during that period. The U.S. also threatened to withdraw from the Oversight Committee overseeing the ceasefire, which again would mean little since they have effectively done nothing to enforce the ceasefire in the face of over 1,000 Israeli violations. Some groups in Lebanon have expressed hopes that the negotiations would lead to less military bellicosity from Israel. Others have expressed skepticism, and many believe that amid the active military issues with Israel, talks extending outside of those are premature. The U.S. has not publicly addressed this ultimatum, though Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said other media reports about discussions with Lebanese officials were baseless and that the U.S. trusts Lebanon to make its own decisions. So next up here, involving Lebanon Prime Minister warns of risk of new war as Israel airstrikes pound southern Lebanon. So the 2024 Israeli war in Lebanon never really completely ended. The invasion was somewhat stopped by a ceasefire, though near daily Israeli attacks continue throughout the ceasefire, with strikes escalating on Friday as the Lebanese Prime Minister is warning that a new war may be brewing. The attacks are targeting southern Lebanon are more intense on Friday than what is normally seen, with Israel reporting they are targeting Hezbollah after rocket fire against Israeli border village in northern Israel. This was the first rocket fire from Lebanon into Israel since the ceasefire went into effect. Israel's attacks include dozens of airstrikes and at least 2 people were killed, one of them a child, and 8 others wounded. The Lebanese President Anoun warned that the attacks were a sign of deterioration of the situation in the south. The rockets remain something of a mystery. The rockets that were allegedly launched by Hezbollah. The Lebanese army reported primitive rocket launchers found in the area and dismantled them. Hezbollah denied any role in the rocket fire, and indeed they historically have more than just primitive launchers at their disposal, and no other group has taken credit. The rockets appear to have done little damage, with Israel reporting intercepting them, with some other reports suggesting they may have hit an empty area and nothing resulted from them. The mayor of the Israeli village condemned the Israeli government and the IDF's Northern Command after the commended after the situation. Oh, no, he did condemn them, accusing them of failures and claiming they are trying to normalize rocket fire in the area, which I'm guessing that they kind of are with the way this is going. And so now we have this one from Jason Ditz, March 24th, antiwar.com. Lebanon contacts U.S. France as Israel escalates attacks and is threatening Beirut. So Lebanese officials, including the president and the prime minister, have been in intense contact with the U.S. and French governments in recent days as Israel is escalating its airstrikes against southern Lebanon and threatening attacks on the capital of Beirut. U.S. and France are meant to be the guarantors of the ongoing ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, though Israel has launched hundreds of airstrikes during that period and says it has the U.S.'s blessing to attack as they wish. France is probably more likely to step in over the recent attacks than the U.S., as the Trump administration has threatened to further back the Israeli escalation. French officials have been more comfortable criticizing Israel for the ceasefire violations than the U.S. has. A handful of rockets were fired from southern Lebanon towards an Israeli village last week. There were reportedly as many as 6 rockets, half of which were intercepted, and the other half fell harmlessly. At least one of them crossed the border before it hit an empty area. The Lebanese army found and dismantled the primitive rocket launchers apparently used, and no group has claimed credit for the attack. At least 8 Lebanese were reported killed in the Israeli strikes, with casualties reported in several villages. The Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, insisted that Beirut will face the same fate as the Israeli village, and scores of attacks on residential areas in Metro Beirut during the Israeli invasion in late 2024. There's concerns that the new airstrikes will happen there as well. And so we could really see a return to where we were maybe last October between Israel and Lebanon if things continue to heat up, which it would be awful. All right, so this one, Jason Ditz, March 23rd, antiwar.com. Israel sends more troops into Syria, launches airstrikes on multiple sites. So Israel continued its attacks on Syria this weekend, sending more troops into the Quneitra governance near the occupied Golan Heights, and also launched multiple airstrikes against military sites in central Syria, including the airport in Tadmur. And so this next update is from March 25th. Israeli airstrikes kill Sitz in southwest Syria. Clashes reported with residents. So Israel continued its ground invasion of southwest Syria on Tuesday and encountered some resistance for the first time it faced any meaningful opposition since invading in December. It came from locals who reportedly fired on Israeli troops in the area around a village in the Dara governance. The Israeli troops were entirely unharmed, but they not only returned fire but called in an airstrike against the group. Israeli tanks in the area also reportedly fired. At least 6 people were reported killed in the incident. Some say 7, and there is a number of others who were wounded. Syrian state media referred to the slain as civilians, while some in the Israeli military called them terrorists. Their identities are of yet unclear, although all indications are they were residents of the area where the clashes took place. Syria condemned the Israeli attacks as a blatant violation of national sovereignty and called for the international community to launch a probe into the circumstances of the attack. The Israeli military said they intend to launch a probe to determine what group the slain Syrians belong to. The Israeli officials confirmed the troops were in the area on Tuesday, but not indicate what they were doing there. Israeli forces regularly raid towns and villages in the Dara and Quintero governance since the invasion began in December. They often interrogate locals, confiscate electronic devices, and seize government records from municipal offices. There was a lot of grumbling about Israeli forces entering civilian areas inside of Syria and a handful of public protests. This was the first substantial exchange of fire. If such incidents reoccur, Israel may find its invasion and occupation of southern Syria a lot less convenient than it appeared in December. In addition to the incident in Dara, Israeli troops were reported on a village near Jamala, interrogating and searching anyone who passed by in a vehicle. There's been no comment on what this operation about either, beyond simply being a part of the Israeli incursion, which the Israeli government says is indefinite. So it could be that they're looking to, just like Palestine, cleanse the area of the native inhabitants and take it as a part of Greater Israel. All right, wrapping up today's show, U.S. launches multiple airstrikes on Yemen's northern Sada province. So the U.S. has launched 8 airstrikes on the outskirts of the northern Yemeni city of Sada and hit other sites in the Sada province on Monday night, severely injuring at least 2 people, Yemen's Saba news agency reported. The strikes came a day after the U.S. bombed residential areas in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, killing at least 1 person and wounding 13 others, according to the Yemeni Health Ministry. Since unleashing massive airstrikes on Yemen on March 15th, the U.S. has continued daily bombings, and the Houthis have launched attacks against U.S. warships and fired multiple missiles at Israel. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, fired another missile at Israel on Monday, marking the 6th such attack within the past week. Israeli media reported the missile was intercepted and shrapnel landed in the city of Beth Semelish. No casualties were reported. According to the Israeli site Ynet, the U.S. has asked Israel not to respond to Houthi attacks and said U.S. forces will handle the retaliation. The Houthis have shown no sign of backing down in the face of the U.S. airstrikes, and their message has been that escalation will be met with escalation. The Houthis have maintained that the only way to stop their attacks now would be a real ceasefire in Gaza and a lifting of Israel's blockade. The U.S. began bombing Israel after the Houthis announced they would start targeting Israeli shipping again after Israel imposed a total blockade of food, fuel, and all other goods from entering Gaza, a major violation of the ceasefire deal it signed in January. The Houthis began launching missiles at Israeli territory in response to Israel restarting its genocidal war and unleashing massive airstrikes on Gaza. The Houthis have controlled the Yemeni capital of Sana'a since 2014 and govern an area where 80% of the Yemeni population lives. A brutal U.S.-backed Saudi war on Yemen failed to remove the Houthis from power, and it involved a blockade, an air campaign, and a ground campaign. Despite the group's resilience, Trump is threatening them with annihilation. All right, everyone, that will do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I will be back with another show of Conflicts of Interest on Friday. But remember, I am interviewing someone on the Kyle Anzalone show later today. This will be Wednesday at 4:45 Eastern Time, so be sure to subscribe to the channel. It is the first link in the show notes page, and I'll see you then.